Hello and welcome. It's 10 a.m. on Friday, the 6th of February. You're tuned in to our mid-morning newscast here on ARIRANG TV. It's great to have you with us. I'm Mark Broome. Let's take a look at what's making the headlines. In a very rare move, 19 American history scholars jointly condemned Japan for trying to pressure a US-based publisher to change the description of the country's wartime sexual enslavement of women. Jordan ups the ante in the war against Islamic State, launching wave after wave of airstrikes against IS militants in Syria to avenge the murder of a Jordanian pilot. Plus, wading into the tax versus welfare debate, Korea's finance minister says tax hikes could fuel deflation and should only happen with the public's full backing. We start with a rare expression of discontent by a group of US-based historians to the Japanese government's attempts to whitewash history. The scholars are protesting against the Abe administration's push to censor Japan's past atrocities, especially on the issue of its wartime system of sexual slavery, which so terribly affected tens of thousands of Korean women. Connie Lee reports.
This is a joint statement scheduled to appear in the March edition of the official periodical of the American Historical Association. A copy of the statement, which was sent to Seoul-based Yonhap News Agency, shows 19 American history scholars expressing strong protest against Japan's attempts to suppress statements or water down atrocities in history textbooks, not only in Japan but also elsewhere in the world. The statement is in response to Japan's efforts earlier this month to pressure U.S. publisher McGraw-Hill to change how it described its wartime sexual slavery issue in one of its history textbooks shown here. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe claims there are errors in the history book taught in classrooms, with his administration continuing to deny state responsibility for the country's past atrocities. The group of scholars, led by Professor Alex Dutton from the University of Connecticut, say that no government should have the right to censor history. And they also accuse the Abe administration of questioning established history and attempting to eliminate references about the country's sexual enslavement of women during World War II. Historians estimate up to 200,000 women, mostly from Korea, were forced to work in brothels for the Japanese military. As a collective statement on a specific historical issue is seen as highly unusual, analysts are now watching how this will affect Abe's relations with the U.S. and his upcoming visit to Washington sometime this spring. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
South Korea's chief nuclear envoy says Seoul and Beijing are close to reaching a consensus on North Korea's nuclear program. Wrapping up his two-day trip to Beijing on Thursday, Hwang Jung-guk told reporters that he had productive discussions with his Chinese counterpart Woo Da-wei on ways to restart the stalled six-party nuclear talks, which are aimed at eventually denuclearizing North Korea. Hwang explained the two sides agreed to work together to prevent North Korea from engaging in, quote, bad behavior, such as nuclear tests. Now, North Korea recently said it was no longer willing to talk with the United States. Washington, however, says it doesn't really take Pyongyang's statement that seriously, and the door to dialogue is still open. For more on how the US thinks North Korea can reform peacefully without a change in leadership, our Hwang Sang-hee reports.
North Korea's transformation does not necessarily have to come through a regime change. That's according to U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Daniel Russell at a press conference in Washington on Wednesday. Referring to the transformation in Myanmar's economy, Russell said the opportunities that have opened and the scope of international cooperation has not come at the cost of a revolution. President Obama's remark in a YouTube interview last month fueled speculation that Washington is seeking a regime change in Pyongyang.
And it is very hard to sustain that kind of brutal authoritarian regime in this modern world. Over time, you will see a regime like this collapse.
Russell said he does not take seriously North Korea's latest declaration that it will no longer talk with the U.S. The North has often opted in and out of dialogue, making it difficult to take any single pronouncement as the last word. Russell reiterated that Washington is willing to hold talks with Pyongyang, but only when the regime is ready to demonstrate its sincerity towards denuclearization. At a separate conference in Washington, Chief U.S. Nuclear Envoy Sung Kim said that the U.S. is looking for an opportunity for serious talks with North Korea, but is also working towards stronger sanctions with the international community. The comments come amid reports that the two longtime foes attempted to arrange a secret meeting last week. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Now, there's growing speculation China has and continues to support North Korea's cyber warfare operations. In an article posted online on the Weekly Standard, Dennis Halpin, a visiting scholar at the U.S. Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins, suggests Beijing's computer experts even helped North Korea hack Sony Pictures last November. He said Pyongyang's cyber warfare agency, Bureau 121, is based at a hotel in northeast China, close to the border, and North Korea's nearly 2,000-member elite cyber hacking team are actually trained in China. The scholar adds that it seems highly unlikely a major North Korean intelligence operation exists in China without Beijing's knowledge and approval. South Korea has reaffirmed that the United States has not made any official request to deploy its advanced defense missile battery known as THAAD to the Korean peninsula. The system is designed to shoot down short, medium and intermediate range ballistic missiles at a higher altitude in their terminal phase using a so-called hit-to-kill method. Now, Seoul's foreign ministry said on Thursday that no consultations have taken place so far. The ministry also stressed that U.S. officials, including outgoing Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel and the top U.S. envoy to Seoul, Mark Lippert, confirmed Washington is undecided on whether to even pursue this issue in the South. China and Russia say the deployment of THAAD to South Korea would pose a threat to their national security. Critics in South Korea say it's Washington's attempt to get Seoul to join its broader air shield system, which would inevitably spark tensions in the region. The clock is ticking for the South Korean military to replace its aging fleet of fighter jets that have already reached or even surpassed their lifespan. In an effort to ensure the transition period is as smooth as possible, the country is kickstarting a new multi-billion-dollar project to develop its own homegrown jets. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
The Korea fighter jet program aims to develop 4.5 generation fighter jets to fill in the gap with more advanced technology, as a batch of Korean fighters are set to be retired in the coming years.
South Korea's Air Force has around 400 jets in service, but roughly half of them are antiquated jets, such as the F-4 and F-5. These days, 4th and 5th generation fighters are the mainstay globally, but Korea is lagging behind with mostly 3rd generation jets.
Korea has set aside roughly $17 billion for a project to develop and mass-produce 124.5 generation fighter jets that will replace the Air Force's old F-4s and F-5s. The KF-X jets are scheduled to be integrated into the Air Force in 2025. On top of that, Korea recently signed a roughly $7 billion deal with Lockheed Martin for 45th generation F-35 stealth fighters, though there are some concerns. Some experts worry that a delay could push Korea's already old fighter jet fleet to the limit. South Korea's defense ministry says it's looking into other options, such as enhancing the performance of the current KF-16 fleet and tanker aircraft to fill in temporarily. The KF-X, however, will not be Korea's first homegrown fighter jet. The F-A-50, which finished development in 2011, was integrated into the Air Force last October. That jet has already caught the eye of international buyers. Korea has exported more than 50 of them to Iraq, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Seoul also plans to sell 24 F-A-50s to Peru this year in a deal worth some $2 billion. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Jordan has been unleashing its outrage in the form of wave upon wave of airstrikes in its first against Islamic State since the extremist group released a horrific propaganda video showing a caged Jordanian pilot being burned alive. For more, we connect to Eunice Kim at the news centre. So Eunice, this is some statement on the part of Jordan, and it seems they're not done yet either.
No, they're not, Mark. Jordan's army released a statement in which it said the airstrikes were just the beginning of its severe response to IS brutality. Jordan State TV aired video of the strikes as security sources said the target were IS ammunition depots and training camps near the group's stronghold of Raqqa in northern Syria. Iraqi media is reporting that 55 militants were killed, including a senior IS commander. Jordan's King Abdullah was in the hometown of the deceased pilot, Lieutenant Muath al-Qasasbeh. The monarch pointed to the skies as the fighter jet flew over the village of Aya on their return home. The father of al-Qasasbeh told CNN that King Abdullah gave him his word that Jordan would avenge his son's death, and that he was told some 30 Jordanian fighter jets did participate in those strikes.
And in the start of those videos of the airstrikes, we could see Jordanian military personnel writing on the missiles and bombs attached to those fighter jets, things like Islam has no relation with you and you are the enemies of Islam. And this is clearly expressing their disgust, not only with the killing of the Jordanian pilot, their colleague, but also with the atrocities that the Islamic State is committing in the name of their religion.
You're absolutely right. And another person who expressed such disgust was all the way in Washington, D.C., U.S. President Barack Obama at the country's National Prayer Breakfast, a prominent religious event in Washington's political calendar. President Obama condemned those who hijack religion to justify striking violence around the world. He did single out the IS group as a, quote, death cult. He said no God condones terror and that those who distort religion for nihilistic ends must be pushed back. Now, on a different note, he also extended a special welcome to the Dalai Lama, calling him a good friend. He was present at that event as well. It was the first time President Obama and the Tibetan Buddhist leader, who is of course reviled by China, attended the same public event.
Eunice, let's turn our attention to Ukraine now, and Russian-backed separatists there continue to make quite a lot of ground on its eastern territories. Now, the leaders of France and Germany made a surprise visit on Thursday, and they were carrying what they say is a peace plan.
That's right. The two leaders of Germany and France, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry was also in Kiev Thursday, saying that Washington could not close its eyes on Russia's continued aggression in the east. Do note there that he made that connection with Russia very crystal clear. Secretary Kerry also presented a $16 million pledge to assist Ukrainian civilians caught in the intense fighting as the White House continues to mull sending weapons to Ukraine. Meanwhile, French President François Hollande and German Chancellor Angela Merkel, as you mentioned, both met with President Petro Poroshenko in Kiev on Thursday with a peace proposal that they also are set to take to Moscow on this Friday. While few details are available on the specifics of this plan itself, the leaders did indicate that one of the discrepancies is that the truce lines remain controversial. They're not the same across all the parties, and perhaps that they do need to return to those that were agreed in September in Minsk. Now, peace talks in Belarus did collapse on Saturday, and EU leaders are expected to consider new sanctions against Russia next week.
Well, thank you very much for your reports there, Eunice, and we'll see you back at noon.
See you then.
Now, there's a fierce debate raging in Korea at the moment over the provision of welfare services and whether or not this would require further tax hikes. The ruling party says it may be time to consider downsizing some of the country's free welfare programs. The main opposition party says the welfare system as it stands is not the major issue, in fact, but rather the current tax system that favors the rich. Our Lee Ji-yoon has more.
More welfare without tax hikes. A promise that once sounded too good to be true is now stirring up debate between the two rival parties. When President Park Geun-hye took office, she promised to expand welfare without increasing taxes by cutting down on unnecessary projects and plugging tax loopholes. However, the recent hike in cigarette prices and revised income tax codes resulted in public criticism that such policies were hurting ordinary salaried workers. Both parties agree that providing more welfare without increasing taxes just won't work, but the two differ on how to fix the problem. The ruling Saenuri Party is calling for a new welfare system that works for Korea. The ruling party's chief policymaker Won Yu-chul says the government needs to reconsider the provision of free school lunches and free childcare programs. He also said instead of increasing taxes, the government should try to provide necessary welfare according to the tax it collects. The party's new floor leader, Yoo Seung-min, however, says increasing taxes is not out of the picture yet, and the party should discuss ways to provide at least some free welfare programs. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy thinks the problem lies with the tax system itself, not on expanded welfare. The main opposition's floor leader, Woo Young-gun, said Parliament should set up a special committee to revise the current tax system. The party also believes that various tax benefits for the rich and the president's pro-business policies are what's causing the country's widened social polarization and the ballooning household debt. With a little more than a year left until the general elections, the two rival camps are under pressure to find a way to appease an angry public that's criticizing the government for squeezing money out of average wage earners. Lee Ji-yoon, ARIRANG News.
Now, with all of the debate about welfare versus taxes, a new report from the OECD may help put things into a more international perspective. The report shows Korea's spending on welfare relative to its GDP actually ranks rock bottom of its list. Our Song Ji-sun reports.
Korea's welfare spending is the lowest in the OECD. The country ranks dead last at 28th out of the 28 OECD countries surveyed last year. The index presents welfare spending as a percentage of GDP, taking into account spending on taxes, pensions, and health and social insurance. Korea's welfare spending was just over 10% of GDP in 2014, less than half of the OECD average. That's just a third of the spending of European countries that topped the list. 6 OECD member nations without 2014 data were excluded from the analysis. Separate data from 2013 shows that the tax burden on Koreans was 24% of GDP, which is also well below the OECD average and just around half that of major European countries. Korea's social welfare spending has hovered at the bottom of the OECD for the past 2 decades. The reports indicate that Koreans are paying less for social welfare and are thus receiving fewer welfare benefits than the countries surveyed. Economists say that Koreans need to pay more taxes to ensure they have a strong social safety net, especially with the combination of slowing growth, a low birth rate, and a rapidly aging population that is sure to lean on the welfare system as they grow older. Song Ji-sun, ARIRANG News.
And Korea's finance minister has waded into the tax versus welfare debate as well. Choi Kyung-hwan says he is against raising taxes at the moment as he believes the extra strain on ordinary people's pocketbooks would exacerbate deflationary pressure on the economy. Now, Hwang Ji-ae reports.
Now is not the time to talk about a tax hike. That's what Korean Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan said on Thursday at the National Assembly. He said raising taxes will lead to shrinking domestic demand under the current economic conditions, stoking concerns over deflation risks. Choi added, however, that if a tax increase was to happen, it could only be through public consensus. The minister is sticking with President Park Geun-hye's campaign pledge to provide more welfare while keeping tax revenues fixed. And to do so, the government pledged Thursday to make its financial structure more efficient by cutting out overlapping welfare programs and raising transparency in local finances. The finance ministry said it will first merge or discard 600 redundant welfare programs. The move to streamline finances looks inevitable as Korea is expected to post a tax deficit for the fourth straight year in 2015. This amid calls for broader welfare in a country that has one of the fastest aging population with low birth rates. The finance ministry estimates last year's revenue shortfall will stand at over 11 trillion won or roughly $10 billion US dollars. 황지혜, 아리랑 뉴스.
And TGI Friday, everyone, as we kick things off with the Korean national football team as head coach Uli Stillege's plan for the future were revealed. And as simple as it looks, there's still a lot of work to be done. Well, now that his first task with the Asian Cup is over with, his next task are the two A matches set to take place in March, followed by the World Cup qualifiers, which will begin in June. And from there, his biggest task is qualifying for the 2018 Russia World Cup and showing what he's capable of doing with the team in Russia. Meanwhile, the 61-year-old has stated that his final plan is to take them as far as they can in the World Cup and have them ranked in the top 30 in the FIFA ranking. Now, we can all bet that Son Heung-min will be a huge part of manager Uli Stillege's roadmap to 2018, but for now, his goal is a season with Bayer Leverkusen. Now, a day after Ki Sung-young left for England, Son Heung-min left for Germany on Thursday and held a brief press conference at the Incheon International Airport. There, he talked about how he still feels the disappointment of coming so close to winning the Asian Cup trophy. But at the same time, he did sound pretty optimistic, adding that he's now going to focus on his season with Bayer Leverkusen as he hopes to get him to fourth place this season in order to qualify for next year's Champions League. Now, staying with football, this time over to the Korean Olympic football team, where head coach Lee Kwang-jong has resigned from his post after learning that he's suffering from leukemia. The 51-year-old head coach, who led the Asian Games team to a gold medal last year, returned to Korea a week after flying over to Thailand for the U-22 Kings Cup. And tests revealed that he's currently suffering from leukemia and has unfortunately resigned from his managerial position, despite recently signing an extension to take over the football team for the 2016 Rio Summer Games. Meanwhile, taking over his position will be the national team's assistant coach, Shin Tae-yong. Now, from Chanho to Jungho, they have much more similarities than just their names. They're major leaguers from Korea, and chances are next season we'll see a Byung-ho join the majors as well. Now, Park Byung-ho, who's currently in spring training with the Nexon Heroes in Arizona, has been getting a ton of attention from the Major League scouts as they expect him to be posted after November 1st of this year. And it seems like the two-time KBO MVP is preparing for a possible move already, as he's been playing third base during spring camp, since his first base position isn't as highly sought in the majors. But experts believe that his price will heavily depend on the success of his former teammate, Kang Jong-ho, and his rookie season. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day, and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Good morning. Unlike quite cold morning we had, the highs will go up similar to higher than yesterday, hovering above 5 for the upper provinces and near 10 degrees down south. So please beware of big temperature gaps between lows and highs and dress accordingly to avoid catching a cold. And sunny skies will be featured throughout the day. Also, the levels of fine dust have came back to normal level here in the capital, making expecting a great conditions to be outdoor this afternoon. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. The afternoon high here in the capital will peak at 6, while Daegu and Gwangju top out at 8, and Busan will peak 10 this afternoon. And as for the other regions, Jeju Island and Daejeon should rise to 9 and 7 respectively, and Dokdo will top out at 6. Now please brace yourself for the bitterly cold Sunday. The low will plunge to -11 here in the capital, and high will only climb to -5, and it seems like we'll kick off next week under an icy cold conditions. Well, that's all for the weather. Let's send it back to Mark in the studio.
Well, thank you very much, Jion, for the weather. And that's all we have for now. Plenty more stories on our website, and we'll be back at noon Korea time with our next newscast. So until then, goodbye.